I swear I have like two moods when it comes to filming. I either look like this, like I do right now, all done up, or I look like this. So today we're gonna be talking about if closeout stores are fast fashion. These places are also called off-price retailers. They're places like Ross, TJ Maxx, Marshalls. You know the types of stores I'm talking about. Now I get asked a lot of the time in a lot of my fast fashion videos, is Ross considered fast fashion? Is Marshalls fast fashion? These kind of questions all the time, and my initial response is because most new clothing is considered fast fashion, my knee-jerk reaction is of course they are, but I decided to delve a little deeper, do some research, and figure out what exactly happens with these clothes and where these clothes come from and things like that, so we can really get a true answer whether or not these places are fast fashion. So basically a definition for closeout stores, if you aren't familiar with these places or you don't live anywhere near where there are closeout stores, because I don't think they're worldwide by any means, they basically buy closeout items wholesale and then sell them at a lower price. They also buy surplus clothing when the vendors create too much inventory, or when department stores back out of purchase orders, they can buy these returns. Also, most department stores are on a buyback agreement, so anything that doesn't sell in the department store often gets bought back by the vendor. Closeout stores will swoop in and buy these items at a cheaper price to be able to sell them at the price that they do, because if you go into these stores, you can find a lot of designer items for a really affordable price. So they buy the returned clothing from the department stores, and it's usually super cheap because no one wanted it in the first place, right? And then the vendor doesn't lose out on much money because they give the closeout stores a good deal when they buy it wholesale. So they'll buy a big mass of clothing that the department stores couldn't sell or didn't want necessarily. So then these closeout stores will buy them at a really discounted price and therefore be able to sell them at the prices that they do. So closeout stores don't always just get the like overstock of from the vendors or the department stores. They often get a lot of unusual or like irregular items or really weird ones that probably won't sell to the masses. So TJ Maxx, who is the parent company of Marshalls and Home Goods, has said that only 5% of their clothing items are irregular or considered irregular or unusual, and about 85% of their goods are new in-season fashion, because you're probably assuming that a lot of the clothing that they get in these cheaper stores are out of season or just from years past and they haven't sold, so they're just put in these stores. But a lot of times you will find the same designer items at these closeout stores that you do in the department stores at a much cheaper price. And the reason that they are able to have these designer items at the same time at different prices is because the department stores purchase these items from the vendors with a buyback agreement, like I mentioned, so therefore there's more risk involved with the vendor, so they don't get as good a deal, give as good a deal to the department stores, whereas closeout stores will buy directly from the vendor sometimes. They are responsible for selling those items, so therefore it's no risk to the vendor, they make all their money back. Now, if those clothing items at the closeout stores do not sell, they will often mark them down to clearance. They can move them around to different locations. That's why you don't see a lot of consistency between closeout locations, because even through like the same ones, like every Marshalls is not the same. You're not going to find the same goods that you would in each of these stores because they'll constantly move around their inventory trying to push it, trying to sell it. And if that still doesn't sell, then I read that they will often donate it to thrift stores, which might make you think, oh, it's actually ethical then, right? Well, we all know what happens to most clothing items that go to thrift stores. They end up in landfills. So there's already this mass of clothing that's being donated by just normal people getting rid of their clothing. Now we have closeout stores donating all these goods to these thrift stores, and sometimes they just can't maintain all the inventory and they end up in landfills. Now, because of this popularity with these closeout stores, what they will do is actually create clothing lines specifically for these stores, and that I think is a lot of what you see. That's not necessarily the designer items that you would find at a department store. They will create lines specifically for that outlet or closeout location. And of course they do this by exploiting workers, using sweatshops. There's a reason why the clothing items are so cheap. However, price does not always dictate whether something is ethical or sustainable or fast fashion, because Chanel and Prada, we all know, use sweatshops. So price does not always dictate whether it's a good purchase or not. But generally, if it's super cheap, there's a reason why it's really cheap, and it's probably not made ethically, and also terrible quality. So closeout stores aren't necessarily ethical because they are still buying directly from the vendor, who is also purchased from the department stores. So it's pretty much on par with the department stores. There might be a few ethical and sustainable brands within the many brands that they carry, but you really have to do your research, and most of the time I would say it's not safe to shop for clothing at these places because they are still buying from the same vendors that other stores do, and it's not really any different. The clothing items, that is, the clothes are basically the same that you would find at a department store, so they're pretty much on par with each other. I'm not saying it's impossible to shop at these places if you really want to. You just have to have like an app like Good On You or something where you can type in a brand and see how they manufacture their clothes and if they are indeed ethical. So what about sustainability? We've been talking a lot about whether these clothes are considered fast fashion or ethical, but what about sustainability? These clothes are in fact clothing that would just be returned to the vendor, right? So what happens to those clothes? Do closeout stores and outlet stores give these clothing items a second chance at finding a home and being loved rather than ending up in a landfill at a thrift store, things like that? It's already been made for the department stores and it just ends up going back to the vendor and then they go to closeout stores. Could it be sustainable? I couldn't find much information about this at all, or what happens to the clothes if they don't go to closeout stores, but I think it's safe to assume that not just thrift clothing ends up in landfills. I feel like a lot of vendors would end up doing this, so that's really hard to say, and if you feel like you can justify it in your mind with that, then have at it. It's always a personal decision, of course, but I still don't believe that is enough to really justify purchasing unethical brands and clothing items. Because although you're not supporting the vendors directly, you are still supporting these closeout stores that get their clothing from the vendors. So if we no longer support these companies, they can no longer buy these clothing items from the vendors, if that makes sense. Now, there's actually a couple forms of competition that closeout stores have, so that's really loud. So ignore the helicopter. Department stores are starting to jump on the off-price retailer bandwagon because they are creating their own kind of outlet stores. We have Nordstrom Rack for Nordstrom, we have Off Fifth for Saks, and Macy's has Backstage, never heard of it, but apparently that's a thing. So this actually creates competition with the So this actually creates competition with the Rosses, the Marshalls, the TJ Maxx's of the world, because these department stores are simply putting all of their overstock, returns, and irregular items into their outlet stores, their own kind of closeout stores, instead of giving the real closeout stores, the Rosses and Marshalls and places, the opportunity to buy back from the vendor. This ensures that the department stores make as much money as possible because they are still selling these items to the consumer directly instead of like selling it back to the vendor and getting a buyback for it, and then the closeout store swooping in. I hope this is all making sense of how this works. So outlet stores are usually single brand places where they sell their items at a discounted price, whether it be clearance items or items that didn't sell at the retailer or department store, or even defective items you can find at these outlet stores. Usually though, it is new merchandise. So there's a big myth about outlet stores that I want to clear up for you guys in case you do shop at outlet stores occasionally or frequently. The myth is that it is the same quality as what you're getting in the retailer. Places like J. Crew, Calvin Klein, Kate Spade. You think that you're getting the same quality as what is in their retail store or what is in department stores, when in actuality it is not the same products at all. Like I said, how closeout stores are creating specific lines just for their own stores instead of going through the vendors to be able to sell the clothing super cheap. Outlet stores do this as well. They will manufacture specific cheaper lines for these outlet stores that are of lower quality and of course lower prices than the real products that they usually sell at the retailer. So of course the same care and quality is not going into those products, and usually that means that they are exploiting someone somewhere. Sometimes it's not even the brand's manufacturer that are making the products. They will outsource to a separate manufacturer to get the items cheaper. So sometimes if you think you're buying Calvin Klein, you're not really even buying Calvin Klein merchandise from their manufacturer. It's from like offshore somewhere else in a sweatshop most likely, and it's not the same product that you're getting at a department store. So some brands don't even deny the fact that they use separate manufacturers for their individual lines for these outlet stores. However, Banana Republic actually got into a lawsuit with their parent company Gap because they were misleading customers to believing that they were getting the same quality of product as they would in in their retail stores. So if you think about it, outlet stores can often be seen as worse ethically than the retailer because there is not the same quality that is going into the normal line of clothing, so they have to use unethical practices, exploiting workers and things like that to get the prices so much cheaper, or they'll use unethical manufacturers who have unethical standards to compensate for this. So I read that there's an even bigger threat to these closeout stores and outlet stores, and that is secondhand shopping. There's a variety of reasons why people like secondhand shopping. A lot of times it's for the deal, right? The prices you cannot beat. So a lot of the same customers that normally shop at outlets and closeout stores like a good deal, so they will go to secondhand stores or thrifting or even shopping secondhand online. There are even some sites online that specialize in secondhand designer items, so it's really easy to get a good deal when buying secondhand nowadays. Now, James Reinhart, who is the CEO of ThredUp, has said that 50% of ThredUp customers report that what they buy on ThredUp replace something that they would have bought at TJ Maxx or Marshalls. So it's kind of the same customer base that's looking for a good deal, often trying to find either designer items or higher brand items at a lower price. You can often find secondhand online especially. So generally, my opinion, I presented all the facts that I now know of. My opinion is to still avoid closeout stores, off-price retailers, outlet stores, anything that's kind of a discounted store. There's usually a reason why they can get their prices so cheap. More times than not, workers are going to be exploited in the process of manufacturing these items, and to me, I still consider this fast fashion because they are trying to manufacture as many clothes as possible to sell as cheap as possible as quickly as they can, which is the same thing that they do at Forever 21, H&M, places like that. If you know of any other kind of information about closeout stores or places like Ross, TJ Maxx, and Marshalls, I'd love to hear what you know of and your opinions about all of this down below. If you feel like there is a way to justify it, you tell me down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.